Hi, I'm William Kent, and this is a companion video to my teacher sample oral presentation for VCE English and EAL. This video is intended to mimic the written justification where we explain the choices that we make. Before that though, the disclaimer. You will have noticed that that video was about 10 minutes long. That was way longer than the 4 to 6 minutes that VCAR wants you to do. That's because I didn't practice it at home. You do need to practice. You can't just guess that your video will be the right time length. You need to practice and make sure of it. If it's longer than 6 minutes, you won't get to finish it. You will be asked to sit down, right? Other thing that I want you to note straight away, in the first 30 seconds of that video, I'd given audience, purpose, and my contention. You need to be able to show your assessor in the first 30 seconds exactly what it's about. Don't waste time with backstory. Don't waste time with anything else. Get straight to letting me know who's your audience, what are you talking about, and what do you want your audience to do? What specific purpose do you want them to do? Okay. You'll notice that that video had a dominant tone, which was angry and critical. You will have different tones throughout your presentation. You cannot talk in just the same monotone. You've got to get passionate. You've got to get angry. So you'll notice, even though I was angry and I did take a very aggressive approach because that was the issue that I chose, you might have a more friendly tone. However, you will need to have tonal shifts. You'll need to change into different tones as your argument goes, just like what I'm doing now, right? You'll notice I had not just the angry and dominant critical tone, I had a mocking tone, a pleading tone, a tone of disbelief. There was even a few times where I was joking. So you will need to have different tones in your written justification. Talk about what tones you're going to use and what they're intended to do. When I'm getting angry, I want my audience to feel X, Y, Z. When I'm mocking them, I want them to think X, Y, Z. You need to be explicit, right? I also want you to note the non-visual cues that I used, or the non-visual techniques that I used. It's not just me reading off cue cards, standing in front of a screen or standing in front of my audience. I also had the whiteboard behind me with slogans and stuff. That only took me 30 seconds to put up. You can borrow a whiteboard marker from your teacher. Do it if you want. I also had the mask that I was using as a prop. I walked onto stage. It was clearly an anti-vax rally. I had the mask showing straight away, I'm a vaccine supporter in this presentation. I'm a vaccine supporter and I'm trying to do the right thing. I also had the clothing. I specifically wore a particular top because I wanted it to be part of my presentation. You are allowed to dress up. You don't need to wear your uniforms. You can wear whatever you want. That's allowed, right? Dress appropriately for your presentation. So clothing, whiteboards, props, all of these things, they are beyond the speech that you make. You could also have a PowerPoint with visuals. If you use a PowerPoint, make sure you're only including sort of dot points, sort of 10 words a slide, photos mainly. That's the point of a PowerPoint. It's not your whole speech just presented on the screen. In your written statement, talk about all of those things and then say, why are you using them? When I use the whiteboard, when I do this, I intend for my audience to see this, to feel this, to act this way. Explain what the effect is. The effect on the audience is just as important for your oral presentation as it was for your analyzing argument essay. You'll also notice I used a whole bunch of appeals, a whole bunch of techniques. So you'd mention them in your written statement and what you intended them for. I made a list of some of the ones I used. I used emotional appeals, talking about my nan, my nephew. I used appeals to fear. I used appeals to common sense. I used appeals to family values. I would list all of them in my written statement and say why I was using them. Likewise, I used inclusive, exclusive language, creating a me versus them with my audience. We're not in this together. It's me telling you what to do. You could talk about that. However, that's a pretty low level technique. So you might want to save your word count for some higher order stuff. Things like I used a lot of puns, repetition. I used a lot of evidence and statistics. I used my anecdote, and my anecdote was a central part of my presentation, talking about my grandmother, or my nan as I referred to her, and my nephew. So because that was so central to the presentation, I'd talk a lot about that in my written statement. I also used those examples to make it relevant to the audience. So when I'm talking about why I use those appeals and techniques, I'd be mentioning that all of those were used to make it relevant to the audience. That this isn't something that has to be an us versus them or a me versus you. That if you do my purpose that I'm asking you to do, it'll be helping your nan and your children. So with everything that you're doing with your presentation, you need to remember you have a very specific audience, and you are trying to get them, or to ask them, or to tell them to do a very specific purpose. You need to make things relevant to your audience so that they want to do the purpose, right? Don't be talking about all these abstract ideas that don't affect people, because they won't care most of the time. Make it relevant. Show them why it affects them, and show them why it's better for them in their lives if they do what you want them to do. Finally, you'll notice that at the start of my presentation, I told them what I wanted them to do. I deserve to be heard, hear me out, get vaccinated, right? And then every point that I was making, I kept repeating that: get vaccinated, book yourself in, get the jab, do the right thing. So my purpose for this thing was to talk to an anti-vax rally and get them to vaccinate themselves. I constantly repeated that. You will need to do that, and you can write it down as repetition, easy marks, right? But constantly repeat your purpose. Do that as the way that you finish it, right? If you want people to buy a Holden, then finish your thing with saying, thank you, go buy a Holden. If you want people to walk more, then say, thank you. As you leave, feel free to do a lap around the block, right? Finish your presentation strongly with a clear thank you, a clear go do this, or please do this. Please don't just finish your presentation with, yeah. It's a really weak way of ruining a presentation. So please finish with a thank you. And on that note, thank you and good luck.